And I want to welcome everybody to this panel and introduce the panelists. This is Ask the Experts. That's hard to say 3 times. Ask the Experts for mental and physical health. And we have 4 panelists that are here today to answer some questions for us. And I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. We have Terri Austin, who is a transitions counselor at Lewis and Clark Community College and a licensed certified professional counselor. We have Dr. Angela Bahner, who is a psychology faculty member at Metropolitan Community College, teaches psychology there in Kansas City. We have Renee Bauer, who is a professor and counselor at Lewis and Clark Community College, and she is also a licensed certified professional counselor. And then we have Dr. Chad Keller, who is a psychology faculty member. He's a professor of psychology at Lewis and Clark and also a licensed counseling psychologist. So what we're going to be doing today is just kind of asking some questions, and we have some questions that have been given to start with. And then if you all have any questions or want some follow-up, just let me know. You can send a chat and we'll be happy to answer any questions that we have. We know that this is a challenging time for students. The end of the semester is challenging, and the COVID crisis and unemployment has made all of that much more challenging and a lot greater uncertainty. And so we want to be here to kind of help support and answer questions that we can. So panelists, the first question for you is, for students who maybe had been taking classes on campus and didn't sign up for remote learning, and now find themselves struggling kind of at the end of the semester because it's challenging, there's a lot due, and struggling with time constraints, what kind of suggestions might you have for them for the next couple of weeks of how to manage that?
Kathy, would you explain didn't sign up for remote learning?
Yeah, so they wanted to be, they came fully expecting that they were going to be in the classroom, and then ended up having to take classes remotely online, and so that's added extra pressure for them. What suggestions might you have about how to cope with that additional stress?
I see what you mean.
Who wants to go first, panelists?
Well, why don't you, Angie, since you...
Thanks for that. Well, hi, everybody. And I'm at a community college in Kansas City, and we're about a week ahead of you all in terms of academic schedule. So a lot of our students here are doing finals right now this week. And I can tell you some things that have helped them start to approach finals. We've talked a lot in my class about the importance of sort of structure, creating structure for yourself, because usually we help do that in the classroom for you all, right? And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges, is that all of a sudden students are kind of at home on their own and with a lot less structure. So finding ways to create structure, I think, is really important. In my class, we did some activities like creating a master list for every class. And so sometimes that can look like going through, because a lot of communication's happening through your learning management system or your email. And so going through emails and announcements and creating like a master list, maybe every day, or a longer term list for every week. Because that can help give you a sense of organization and structure that may help you feel less chaotic and crazy as you go into finals week. So that's one suggestion, is perhaps keeping a pad of paper or a calendar and creating a master task list for each of your courses. And then I'll stop talking and let some other people jump in, and I'll share some other ideas if other folks don't, but yeah.
No, I'm like, I want to steal that idea for a master list. Renee, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I'll just say that when we have an in-class class, on-campus class, there's an incentive for getting to class. Then we don't get marked tardy, we don't get marked absent, so many absences, and your grade goes down. So that's a pretty big incentive. When you're at home, there aren't those incentives, and we have to create our own. Now, some instructors may say, I want to see everyone sign in every day. And if they don't, then today I don't, and I'll do that tomorrow, and time gets away. So we have to give ourselves our own incentives. It might be, I get to talk to a friend on the phone, or I get to whatever is something that's kind of special for me, but I hold it off until I do what's on my master list.
That's a great idea. I like that.
The other thing, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Renee.
I was just going to say, people are different learners. And so I would start with my hard subjects first. And those are the subjects we don't want to do first. But I would do those first. Then they're out of the way. We're not sitting there dreading them while we're doing our easy course. And then we can get to the easier ones that feel more uplifting. We all know if we're night people, day people. So kind of schedule your patterns around that. And we can set our own pattern with that rather than having to be with the school's pattern. I'll hop out.
Yeah, I was going to say that, definitely I agree with both Renee and Angela. Another thing I think is helpful is finding your workspace at home and setting up an area where you're going to be able to focus. For me, the experience of working from home has been challenging because there's other things going on. And if you don't have a dedicated space where you can actually, get things done, have some uninterrupted time, then it makes it a lot more difficult. And, you've got a million different things going on at home. So just setting aside a place, even if it's in the bedroom, I bought a little table to go in my bedroom. So if I was working from my bedroom, I could actually have a table. It's hard to focus on work when you're sitting in your bed. And I've had a lot of students that tell me they're working from bed. I'm like, get off the bed because you won't get much done if you fall asleep.
And what I would kind of just suggest too is using the class time, try to, kind of force yourself to use the designated class time if possible. Now, of course, for those that have children at home, that may be hard to do. And I also think, regardless of whether it's that you have children at home or you have parents at home, it's also maybe that this is going to look different than what it looked like in the classroom. So of course, clearly, if there's other people in the house, your children, you're not going to be able to probably sit there uninterrupted for 60 minutes. And that can probably be, really frustrating. But to cut yourself some slack about that. And that's why I've even been trying to do a better job from the instructional standpoint in clearly chunking out, this might be 30 minutes, whether that's the actual lectures I've been recording or here's how I would break down the chapter. And so approaching it more in small chunks than even a 75-minute stretch, which is, typically what my class periods are. And then the other thing is, kind of the last thing that I kind of jotted down was, and don't hesitate to, push the professor if you are well, do you have any suggestions for more structure? The whole idea of me starting to actually literally spell out how I would break our chapters down into modules came from a student who said, I just don't know how to do this. And so then it was oh, okay, yeah, I need to translate this more. And of course, you have working relationships with your professors, and some may be able to respond and some may not be able to respond, or to be able to respond in a helpful way. But, don't hesitate to ask them for that help too.
Great.
Okay, great. Those were some excellent answers. So let's take a look at maybe another question. So one of the things I think that this COVID-19 crisis has kind of brought on for people is those people that might have been struggling with some emotional health issues prior to this might be struggling even more now. What suggestions would you have about steps that they could maybe take to begin to start to feel a little bit better given the added stress of the COVID-19 situation?
I think that when students know they're under a deadline, and this is such a different situation, if they could say that to the instructor, and if the instructor could say, that's fine, they might still have the same deadline, but go slowly, take your time. It's just some reassurance from the instructor that I hear you, I know this is hard, and it helps the student, I think, to catch their breath. Some instructors will say, well, I know it's due at midnight tonight, get it in by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Not all will do that, and not all classes would be able to do that. But I think just knowing I have a little choice here, rather than the whole thing looking so overwhelming that I'm just ready to throw up my hands.
I think it's really important for students to reach out. You know, we have our counseling services. You know, there's still community counseling services being offered. Right now, everything is mostly by phone or virtual, but, you know, there are a lot of resources out there. And, you know, it's just really important for people not to isolate. You know, a lot of people are feeling more depressed, more anxious, and making sure that they're connecting with other people, you know, not just withdrawing, because, you know, there's a tendency when you get overwhelmed to just shut down and, you know, stop communicating. We had a student that we'd been trying to reach who said he just turned off his phone, and he felt so overwhelmed, and he felt like he was letting people down by not participating. And so he just stopped connecting. And so we were able to talk to him and help him understand that we know this is difficult. And so, you know, communicating, talking to, you know, friends, family, and reaching out to professionals is very important. And, you know, and that's what we're here for.
I have one student who already had a therapist in the community, and the therapist would check in with him at 3 o'clock every Friday afternoon. And so I said to my student, is that enough for you? And he said, no. And I said, have you discussed that with him? He said, no, one time a week should be it. I don't think he'll give me another time. So I asked him if that Friday, if he could talk about it. I also asked him if I could have permission to call the therapist and just leave a message. I knew the therapist couldn't tell me anything about him, but just to say, this is what he's going to be asking you on Friday. Would you see if that's at all possible, or talk to him about alternatives? And I called him the day after the therapy session, and he said, yeah, he'll talk to me on Tuesdays and Fridays. And so that's just been much better for him. And then I chat with him a little bit in between.
Yeah, and I would say that, of course, if you're aware that you have those kind of emotional health issues and you weren't engaging in therapy prior, that this might be a time then to, you know, either it's looking through your insurance, reaching out to Renee or Terri. I always tell people, you know, you can start vetting therapists, you know, usually primarily if you have health insurance, if you have that access, start through your health insurance website. If you want to look more broadly, you can always do a search through psychologytoday.com because you can search by zip code. And I was meaning to jot this down, but I know that there's also another website. It's like Collective Pathway, I think, but that is specifically a group of therapists who have committed themselves to providing services on a sliding scale. And of course, I've heard from some folks, well, it seems like it would be weird to start therapy versus, you know, telehealth wise. But the way that, you know, I think of it, the way that, you know, I've had friends approach it is like, well, hopefully it doesn't hurt to at least try it. You know, hopefully at the minimum, like trying out a therapist shouldn't hurt you. And so that may be something to take into consideration. And, you know, kind of my other notes that I jotted down is, well, what worked before COVID in terms of improving your well-being? And, you know, some of those things you may not be able to do in the same way, whether that was a game night with friends, going to the gym, going to the mall. But can you somehow reconceptualize those in a COVID world now? You know, and I'm not a game person. all my friends, coworkers, and family know that.
So
But
no Zoom game nights for you?
No. I'm a sore loser. And so, but I've heard of people say, well, they've reconceptualized their game nights via Zoom. They've reconceptualized their movie nights via Zoom. And that even, and I thought this was ingenious too, of where I've heard of students doing like Zoom office hours together, where they're just basically sitting, like just doing their work, but it's like they're in a coffee shop or in the library together so that they can just like make random comments if they need to.
That's a great
And it may not be the same, but it's at least some, it's some kind of substitute. And then I would also say is avoid what makes it worse. And be mindful of that, whether it is, talking to certain people that are just really zapping, whether it is news stories. Now, obviously, one of the challenges with school is school might be that thing that makes you feel worse. And of course, that's going to be detrimental to avoid it. But again, then how do you approach it in small chunks to maybe demystify it or make it a little bit less scary? So
those are all really great suggestions. When considering this emotional well-being during the pandemic, I think I do everything that all these experts have shared with you. I would also maybe add to the discussion to consider that we're living through such a historical moment with the global pandemic, and the struggle has impacted all of us. I think everybody, so remembering it's also okay to not feel okay during this time, because this is not normal. Things have really changed. And so I think having kind of grounding yourself in some compassion for yourself and for other people, that we are all struggling and some days are worse than others. But to keep in mind that it's normal to have increased stress or loneliness during quarantine, or sadness and grief for the things that we're missing. So I think there can be some power in normalizing that this is not a normal time, and it's actually human, and it's showing good mental health to have these emotional responses, right? Because things are abnormal. And then maybe one thing I would add to feel better is, and I think it kind of builds on what Chad was saying about what worked before. And maybe a way to approach that might be to consider your key life values, which can be a pretty big question. But your values in life are those things that give you purpose and meaning, and it's kind of what drives you to feel motivated and engaged. And if you haven't ever explored your life, so you might, is it learning? Is it connection with other people? Is it leisure and playtime, or faith, or enjoying nature and beauty? And if you want to do a value sort, there's actually a free, Harvard does a free value sort and you can access that at thegoodproject.org. And it's a really quick, it takes less than 5 minutes, and it's kind of, you can sort your life values, and it might help you think about what are some of those big things that are important to you. And then, as Chad mentioned, find those creative ways to still do something that's in line with your values. That's a way to kind of build positive emotion, because people often feel more wellness and positivity when they're doing things that really matter to them. And so the challenge is we might have to do those differently while we're on quarantine or due to the pandemic, but if we can still connect to some of those key things that are really important, it can make us feel better. So if it's service to other people, can you do something sweet and nice for your neighbors? You could get kids and family members involved in that. I know my sister took her kids, this was partially also to get them all out of the house because they were all going a little crazy one day. But they went on a walk, and they live out in the country, and picked up litter around their roads, and they kind of turned it into an educational moment. So that's like connecting to a higher value and social. So to think creatively about how you can still do things that matter to you even during this abnormal time.
I thought just if you have a grandparent, you could call that grandparent more often and just have a nice grandchild-grandparent relationship at a time that the grandparent might be needing it as much as you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add another thing about resources. So, Centerstone, Chestnut, all of the community mental health facilities are still operating. We have the resources listed on our website because, the need is high. Obviously, everyone knows that. And just because we can't do it in person doesn't mean those services aren't still available. So, any students that have any questions about any of that can call us, can check the website, and, we'll try to help connect with whatever services they're needing.
And I had an email from Centerstone the other day that said, we are still taking new clients.
Mm-hmm.
So don't think that we're overloaded. We're taking new clients. So I was very happy about that.
I might add one more thing as I was thinking about even myself and how, because I've had days that have been really kind of hard or felt more down or sad during this time. And the first thing that I do is, I tend to, if I'm feeling that way, I may be less active because it feels harder. But I think there's so much research that also shows the importance of physical activity for our mood, not just physical health, but mental health. And so any small thing you can do to get some movement in your body, you don't have to go have an exercise session if you hate exercise. I'm kind of one of those people, but you can get some joyful movement, even if it's a small walk outside, getting some fresh air. And I think just also I remind myself, what are the basics? Am I eating? Am I sleeping? Am I getting dressed? I don't know how many of us how many of us have like sweatpants on the bottom right now?
Shorts.
So think about some basic, those basic self-care activities like nutrition and sleep and movement do wonders for our mental health. And I know sometimes it's the last thing we want to do, but if you can get yourself to do it, it pretty quickly builds its own reinforcement, and you might notice feeling a little bit better.
And getting outside.
Yeah.
Just going outside. I think when you're doing things from home, sometimes you don't realize how long it's been since you just walked outside.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So getting that fresh air, getting some sunshine.
I agree.
Okay, great answers. And I just want to remind everybody that's listening, if you have a question that you want to submit, you can type that in to me privately on the chat or to everyone if you want to. We'll keep on going with our list of questions, but don't hesitate to interject if you'd like to. A couple of you experts in your answers mentioned increased family time. And sometimes that can be great and supportive, and sometimes not so great. That might lead to increased conflict within the family, particularly if you're all quarantined in the same place. So what suggestions might you have about how to deal with increased conflict that might be occurring based on the quarantine time together?
I would say communication is really, really important. I know a lot of people are at home where, there's someone in college, there's someone working from home, there's a younger child doing schoolwork from home. And so they may be sharing a computer or, sharing space. And so talking about those things, trying to figure out kind of a schedule, talking about like household things. I know in my house, it just seems like the dishes and the trash and everything has multiplied so much. Mm-hmm. And so talking about, okay, how are we going to manage this? Because, if mama keeps seeing all those dishes every night, she might get frustrated. And so talking about, okay, there are different expectations now. We're all home more. And so we probably need to work together to figure out how to make this work because, we don't know how long we're going to be here together. And I think planning some positive, like family time, even though, you're home all day together doesn't mean you're necessarily spending like quality time. And so, I think those conversations, making plans about, how things should work is really important.
I have a student, female student, And she and her mother have never gotten along. And so she would leave for school in the morning and stay in the library all day in between classes, and even until the library closed before she'd go home, because that made less time with her mother to have a confrontation. And so it's very frustrating for her. So I asked her if she could pick her battles. There are kind of sometimes some triggers that just make you go, oh, there it is again, and you may plow into it. So picking the battles and not trying to avoid conflict, but just seeing what's important to you and what's not. And when it is important, then certainly talk about it. If it's that little piddly thing that she's been doing since you were 3 years old, let's just let it go and save it for a bigger item.
And I would say that the same would even apply then for the caregivers too. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that just kind of listening to Terri and to Renee, thinking about that, you know, and I have to be cautious, I'm not a parent, but that it's like, you know, for parents recognizing that, well, you know, I'm thinking back to kind of the attitude that was when I was growing up or at this age was, it was still my parents' house, okay? And so when there was that conflict, because it was still my parents' house, then I would just leave for a little bit. No, whether that was to go outside, whether that was to go spend some time with friends. But that in this case, it's like, well, but they don't have, the college student, the youth doesn't have that power. And so how do you then kind of negotiate that? Because definitely especially if we're looking at kind of traditional age college students, it's like, well, they don't have the freedom to have their own house during this time, but they're not that, you know, small children yet. And that, you know, part of this developmental trajectory at this time is greater independence and autonomy. And so how do you kind of be mindful and respectful of that for your youth then, who is feeling kind of trapped and perhaps powerless, or greater levels of powerlessness given the circumstances? So
those are all really great suggestions, and maybe to build a little bit on some of what's been said, thinking about, I think it goes into that planning, I think that Renee mentioned. So if there are things that are triggers, like if it's dishes or if it's nap times or if it's, you know, who's using what space when, to maybe anticipate and have a family meeting or a roommate meeting when people are not already agitated about it, when people are kind of invite people to show up in a good space and say, hey, you know, we keep this common goal in mind. Like we all have to be here together. We have a common goal of, you know, finding a creative solution. And so maybe anticipating a stress trigger and doing some planning before it actually erupts, or scheduling a time when people can be invited to show up with kind of their best selves to maybe do some creative family brainstorming could be a potential strategy on some of those hot button issues.
Mm-hmm. Good idea, Angie.
And a follow-up to that, somebody asked from the audience of what if those relationships were difficult prior to the quarantine? How do you negotiate that when they were already difficult and now the added stress on top of that?
That is a hard question, because then you're trapped with that person. I think I go back to what Angela said is, can you at all negotiate? Can you talk in a time when things are pleasant and see how far you get with that? I realize that may be very trivial for some people, that they would immediately say, that won't work at my house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, Chad, what do you see in your scope of people that you see? I don't know what age you treat.
So kind of young adults, and yeah, I mean, this has even come up, you know, as far as the relationship won't dramatically change, you know, that like has been mentioned, it will likely only be the strains and the weak spots will already probably be there, or will be highlighted, will be magnified, I should say. And so in some of those cases where it feels like there just cannot be kind of some compromise or meeting kind of in the middle ground, sometimes it is as then it's like, well, how do you, in some ways, do, like Renee, what you said, as far as with your student, as far as then minimize the contact, which sometimes can feel like a kind of really like a hopeless response, but it's also like, well, but we also have to work with the current system. And so for some people that may mean, like, yes, I'm going to go take my laptop, drive over to campus and use the parking lot internet, because at least I have some freedom and some quiet there. And so kind of trying to just minimize some of those flare-ups then. Because, I think it can be hard, especially if it's not a mutual acknowledgement that the problems probably existing in the system are the result of both parties, not just one, which sometimes can, I think, be where, you can't find that middle ground is when the other person's stonewalling you and saying that it's all you, this is your problem. So
I agree. I think it's okay to minimize contact, if that's to manage the current situation and to keep yourself safe, that we don't have to try to engage. We can't engage in changing people during this highly stressful time. And so I think doubling down on any kind of self-care, how do you self-soothe? How do you manage your stress? Like, how do you be kind to yourself? And not have letting go of those expectations, maybe that this relationship is going to change it's not going to change probably during a more, like Chad said, a more heightened stress time like the pandemic. So really doubling down on self-care and safety, and and if there's anything that's dangerous, there have been a lot of reports about increase of kind of abusive situations or as a result of the pandemic. So I think reaching out to those local resources that have been mentioned, doing some safety planning if there's any kind of abuse situation. Even the National Domestic Violence Hotline can help with safety planning if it's a more severe or kind of serious situation. So I think the importance of reaching out, if that's the case, particularly if it's a little bit more maybe on the abuse side, reaching out and not staying isolated is really key.
Yeah, I think, again, those resources, if it's a friend that you need to vent to, you have a counselor, just anyone that you feel safe talking to about your feelings so that you're not just holding them in. You can try to minimize, but if there's someone in your household that is really, treats you in a way that's upsetting or hurtful, you're going to have those feelings. And so, another challenge, and I found this in counseling people from home, is that finding that place in your house where you can go talk privately. So a lot of my students have gone into their car or just outside because the person that they are talking about is in the next room and have, walls are sometimes thin. And that might create a whole new problem. And so, just kind of thinking, okay, what can I do that's going to help me kind of decompress? And so that way I can go back in knowing, okay, this is temporary. And again, I think also realizing this is temporary, that we're not going to be, locked up with each other forever and ever. It will change at some point, but, in the meantime, just doing, finding whatever you can to help yourself cope during this time is really important.
Along with that, Terri, if in some families they call each other bad names, or you're this, you're that, and it's really hard to deflect those and not absorb those. And if you could tell yourself, you're not what they're saying, you know who you are, and be who you are inside, despite what they're saying on the outside. I tell people, kind of put your protective armor on and let their words bounce off of you, if you at all can.
Okay, we've got a couple questions that were kind of along the same theme. So I'm going to kind of combine those two questions that our audience asked into one. And it was, how do you deal with the frustration that you might be experiencing for people who are not being compliant to the CDC recommendations about how to deal with COVID? Either they're not wearing face masks in public, they're not social distancing, and especially when those people might be members of your family that are extended family that you have to have contact with because you're caregiving or interacting with. How do you cope with the frustrations of that and still try to maintain some peace within yourself as a result of that?
Such a good question.
That's hard if they're in the same household. You know, if they're across the street, you just go, oh my gosh, they're contributing, but just go back in your house. But if they're in your house, I don't have a clever answer for that.
Well, Chad, do you want to jump in, Chad? I saw
Oh,
you.
Angie, I'm curious. Yeah, no, this is a
This is a tough one. And so I immediately kind of thought to other issues that have been intractable in my family, like whether that be diversity issues or having disagreements where these value conflicts kind of come into play in family. And this is a tough one because it's like we are then at the mercy of kind of our health and safety, right, is being influenced by this kind of out of control variable because we can't force people to do things. And so, I mean, I think this is and so many people are struggling with. So one, know you're not alone in that struggle and that frustration. What I might turn to is if they're in my family or in my house, I might call upon their best selves and try to invite them in and really use I statements rather than, because I think whenever we get this frustrated, if we come like, you're doing this, or I'm angry, or that frustration comes out, that's, we're going to just kind of stay in a gridlock. And so if we can maybe invite that person by saying, I know we all really care about each other and we care about we want our children and our family to be safe. I'm feeling like, and so use those I statements. Would it be possible if I did this, or if you make a specific request, and and if they don't, that's where it gets really hard. And I think we have to then set boundaries. So if it's whether going over to somebody's house and not doing that anymore, or trying to find alternative arrangements, and at the bottom line, it's going to be, we can only control ourselves. So if it's in our house, to do what we feel is safe, to do what we feel is comfortable, to express that clearly, say, I'm going to do this because I care about our safety and our health. So I'm going to be doing these things. I ask that you respect that, and I'll respect your decision not to. And so maybe just to limit the conflict, but still act within your own values as much as you can. And know that you're not alone in the frustration of dealing with that. And there may not be an easy solve to that one.
Yeah, because I think that, it's a different situation if it's, some like a family member that you're needing to provide support that's in their own house, because there's more room as far as negotiating. Well, what does that mean if you don't, if you have a different viewpoint or different kind of, you're not going to engage in those kind of recommendations, well, then I will have to renegotiate or rethink my involvement or my level of support. But when it's within your own household, then, and especially if there's a power dynamic where it's caregivers versus, the person with more power is saying, I'm not going to comply with these kind of recommendations, and you are of less power. But then I think, it gets into what Angie said as far as, then ultimately it seems like focusing on what you can control. And I would say, and Angie kind of alluded to it, like, well, validate, like, okay, I recognize that you may think differently, or you may think that this is not necessary, or that I'm just being, hysterical and such, but I'm not, like, my feelings are real about this, just as yours are. And then, the other thing is and I think especially as therapists then, and I will say that then likely it will trigger upon past hurts of your caregivers dismissing your feelings and reality, and so it will be triggering in the present because of the circumstances, and it's okay that this will probably open up some other wounds inside about past times where this caregiver or this loved one took your feelings and said thanks but no thanks, and actually I think you're just being too sensitive and such. And so just be mindful of that it's like that's why the volume of your intense or your distress might get really turned up by their decision to not comply.
In terms of frustration, I'm sorry, Renee.
No, that's okay.
We're all feeling frustrated for various reasons. And so, none of us are wanting to be living this way. And I think, if you're approaching someone that has a different perspective, it's important to tell them how you feel, if it's a family member or friend, and also hear how they feel. I've had this issue in my household. I have a dad who's 93. My daughter's here with her brand new baby. And, my son comes over and he's one that didn't want to wear masks. And so I just told him, hey, we have at-risk people here. And I understand if you're not concerned about it for yourself, but you're going to put them at risk and you would feel really bad if something happened. And so, based on that, and I let him know, in a kind way, if you're not going to protect us, I'd really rather for you not to come over, and and I told him, it's not that I'm upset with you at all, but I have to protect them. I have to. And so, he understood that. It took a while for him to finally look at it that way, because I think it's an issue of people don't like to be told what to do. None of us do. And people are tired. They're tired of having to wear masks. They're tired of being at home. They want things to go back to normal. We'd all like that. But I think it's just really important to try to have those conversations. If you're around people that you're not related to or you don't have to be around, avoid. But just realize, you're taking care of yourself. If you're being safe, then, you can't really worry about everybody else, because that's too much to take on.
Yeah.
I like what you said about that we're tired. If you're a rule follower and you're wearing your mask everywhere, but someone else in the house isn't, I think even expressing, I don't like wearing this mask, I'm kind of tired. I'm going to hang in there because I don't want to become part of the problem. And that's a different way to look at it. It's not like, oh, I don't mind, I'm going to wear this. I do mind, but I have to go with the plan to be protective of all of us.
Yeah, because it's not fun.
No.
Yeah.
Makes it hard to breathe and steams up glasses and
fashion wise, it's
oh yeah. I have different colors. Different colors, so I can color coordinate.
Well, and the one last thing I do want to just say, because I think that and even in terms of when I've had these frustrations, and even frustrations with other people that are violating some of the rules, it's then brings up this whole thing for me, like, well, how do I enforce my boundaries? Like, how do I compassionately advocate for myself? And because, I think at least for me, and I think maybe others, it's like I either will sit there and say nothing and be miserable and hate them and hate myself for not saying anything. Or because I'm so anxious and scared, I'm going to just become this, this is what I need, and come off way too, domineering and such. But how do you find that balance, that, compassionate boundary. And that, I think there is a way to do that where you don't have to just shut up and put up, but you also don't have to become so belligerent, because then that usually, when I have fallen into that trap, then I feel mad about how I handled that. So.
Okay, I think that might be the catchphrase of the day: compassionate boundaries. Love. Just
well, and I have to,
love that.
yeah, I have to steal that from, I don't remember her name. She was a neighbor that I used to garden with. No, and yeah, it was a neighbor that I used to garden with, and we had the next door neighbor to the community garden was belligerent about having a community garden there, and she's like, we have to have compassionate boundaries with him. So
that's great.
That's a great
okay, we have another question from the audience. What specific practical suggestions would you have to help students stay on task in the next couple of weeks without the feeling of being overwhelmed, which can easily happen? So suggestions do you have about that?
This isn't very heady, but what I would ask people to do is, when you have something, an assignment, check it off, and then you know you don't have that. I would also cross off the day on the calendar to know I'm finished with that day. Let's count how many more days I have. And it keeps counting down. And I know they might be panic thinking I have all this work to do in that time, but if you're getting it finished little by little, you can see some accomplishments, and then you really can see the end coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, whether it's the master to-do list that Angie talked about, and yeah, that frequent checking of email, like and I know professors probably are varying on how much they are communicating with their students, but I've been encouraging, because I do tend to be a frequent emailer, to at least try to log in 2 to 3 times a week, look at the course calendar, and then I would also say, letting go of the perfectionism, or in terms of that it has to, and for, especially for those students that tend to already struggle with that. I mean, I think that this is, and I think probably all of us that have finished our degrees know, if I could go back for all of the wasted hours of trying to get the perfect grade, to just be like, I needed to do well in my psych classes. It's okay if I would have maybe got that C in, biology, or for my students, it's A&P, especially if you already are in the nursing program, let that A&P class, just the C will be okay. And kind of letting go of that piece to it. And like Renee said, see if you're that far behind, see if there is a way to salvage the semester, and I know that sometimes students will say, well, I know that professor, I know they won't do that. And maybe that is the case, but I think also sometimes in those situations, we may be projecting our feelings about authority figures onto them. And it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. I mean, I always validate that for students when they say, well, can I have extra credit? No, but I'm glad you asked, and stuff. So,
and I think if you have a professor that you find maybe isn't able, for whatever reason, to be as helpful as you might need, reach out to those other supports, like your advisors and your counselors on campus, to say, this is what I'm dealing with. How can I plan? To get that extra help in making a plan. So even if that teacher isn't doing it, there are probably those other campus supports that could help you devise a plan. I think planning and organization is really key. I'm going to throw out, it's a limited stress, right? Finals week, there's an end date. We know what it is. So you want to approach it with I'm going to get up and get dressed. I'm going to schedule a class session. And then I think Renee mentioned earlier, reward yourself after you have completed some of those tasks, to build that positive momentum. When we don't build in rewards for doing hard things, it gets harder to do them. So build in those rewards and incentives for yourself. So reward yourself after a good study session, after getting a task done. do something that you enjoy, and know that it's a limited stressor. It's a limited time. And so you can get through it. You can and you will get through it. And I know there are people who want to help you. So if you're really struggling, I think it's a time to reach out as well.
And I'll add on to what you said a minute ago, Chad. I tell students, go ahead and ask, even if you think the answer is going to be no. And that's the worst it can be. They'll tell you no. But if you don't ask and later you find out they would have said yes, you feel worse. So I'd rather ask and be told no than to not ask at all.
Right. Yeah, I would say also, just breaking things down into smaller bite-sized pieces. Because if you look at all of these things you have to do, your brain can just go, oh, can't do it. If you just say, okay, I've got this to do in this class, this to do, and kind of do things in order of priority. Don't put off those big assignments for last. Get those big things done. And so then maybe at the end, you just have little things to do. And if you feel like, okay, this one class is just, I'm just drowning, we have options for, maybe doing incomplete or withdrawal, that kind of thing. But, look at the whole picture and see, okay, this class I'm pretty much caught up, this one I'm behind in. So figuring out a plan and, and that's something instructors, counselors, advisors can help with.
Even tasks as large as writing a paper and people just feel stumped, I can't get started. I'll say to students, do you know what the title, what title you want to use? Well, yeah. And do you have all of your sources? Well, yeah, but it's the middle part. And I'll say, type up your title page and get your last pages in with all your sources and then take it from there. And that's such a small thing, but it feels accomplished in a very small way.
And I think, I think finals week in general, but then, given the present circumstances, it can really, for those that struggle with self-confidence, with a critical self-narrative, it's just getting turned up, and one of the things, and I've read some things, and it's something that I think about is well, tapping into like your ancestry, your heritage, whether that's as a woman, whether it's as a member of the queer community, whether it's like your own family. So like for me, like during some of this stuff, I'm like, okay, if my grandparents could live through the Great Depression and my great-grandfather died during the Spanish flu pandemic that resulted in my grandfather at 12 getting kicked out of his house and going on his own, I can persist. I will persist. Because even if we don't feel like, if you struggle with self-confidence, chances are, though, your ancestors, either from your biological family, your chosen family, your people, have risen time and time again. And can you tap into that? Especially when you want to lay on the floor and just cry, maybe like put a weighted blanket on and watch Grey's Anatomy and just call it a horrible day.
That's a good idea.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Chad. I think because one of the things I think finals is stressful regardless, but doing it during a global crisis is just, I mean, come on. I think we're remarkably adaptive and resilient creatures and human beings. And I think Chad's idea of remembering that humans have lived through maybe even situations worse than this one, right? And it's such a source of strength and resilience and can help. And I think that idea of persisting through difficulty can really help. Knowing that it's going to be hard, but that we can still get to the end point even though it's hard.
Okay, great. Well, we are kind of winding up here. So let me ask another question that kind of combines a couple of questions. So Angie alluded to the idea that there's a lot going on and it can be very overwhelming. How would you suggest that people stay informed about what's happening without consuming too much that they get overwhelmed? And how can we find hope in, and maybe a little bit more certainty in this stressful, uncertain time?
I find myself that if I listen to too much news, I just get overwhelmed. I get sad. Oh, how many people have died today? I feel sad for their families. And so I rely on someone else who's doing all that vigilant watching to just tell me when the important things are, tell me the things I need to know rather than everything. And that has eliminated a lot of stress for me.
Yeah, and I've even, changed in terms of when and how I consume my news. So for me, I tend to be a person that does more because I'm not a morning person. And so I tended to often read the news at night when I would get home. And so I've stopped doing that. So now it is that in the morning, I will look at my news and, and regardless of where you get your news, kind of assessing, well, do I need to click on this or do I not need to click on this? And of course, there's different kind of, like what is informative news? And like, I'm mindful that yes, like right now, hearing about reading opinion pieces, I don't really need to. I for myself, I'm like, I don't need that. Hearing about things related to like a vaccine or social distancing guidelines, yes, I do want to be aware of that. And so kind of actually being a little bit mindful before I automatically click, because news can be a way. And I think, for those of us that were, with 9/11, remember when finally they were like, the news has to stop showing the planes going into the towers, or when it was Princess Diana died and it was like, I want to watch the footage. I want to watch the footage that they found. Because from a psychological or mental health standpoint, we're aware that, especially for folks that have trauma histories, is that can actually be a way that we're self-triggering ourselves. And there could be a variety of reasons of why we would want to continue to self-trigger ourselves by reading news or clicking on stories. But we have to be mindful of that. And I've even taken the news app off of my phone, just because at the beginning, it was like, I want to click on this, click, click, click. And then I found myself, getting worked up about things that I was like, okay, but I could have just maybe consumed that earlier in the day or not consume it at all, because it really wasn't an informative piece for me.
Yeah, I think, the time limiting, just kind of deciding how much can I handle? How do I, like, for me, I might see something on my phone and I read the headline and I think, okay, I don't need this one. Because there's a lot of suffering going on and it's not within my control. There's information I want to have, but the things that are going to cause me pain and I can't do anything about those, there's nothing for me to do with those feelings. And so, I think it's important to just recognize our own needs and, just be okay with not watching the news, be okay with not having long conversations about it, and like Renee said, there are people in your life that are going to tell you what's going on. They will. They'll call you. They'll text you. They'll let you know. My son does that
Whether you want it or not.
Right. Oh no, my son watches the news continuously, and did you hear? I'm like, I don't need to know all of that. But and as far as we need to feel safe, and so I really encourage folks to think about what's actually going on in your life. Are you safe? Is your family safe? Because if we keep looking at that big picture, we're not going to feel safe, but right now I'm safe. I'm taking precautions. I'm doing the things that I need to do to keep me and my family safe. And we kind of have to reassure ourselves and remind ourselves of that, just kind of ground ourselves in what's actually happening within our own lives that we do have control over.
Mm-hmm.
And really it's contributing to, when we keep ourselves safe, it's contributing to other people being safe as well. So there's a second motive with that.
I agree.
Okay, what I wanted to do just real quickly was to make sure that everybody has seen the counseling resources page. So I'm going to share my screen, and maybe can you see that? No, you can't see that, can you? Okay, I'm going to share my screen and find, oh, here it is. There it is. There we go. So this is the counseling services page, which has information, a phone number, and Renee, is that still the best way to contact you now, or is sending an email a better, more effective way?
An email is, well, this phone number, the 4125, I get those messages. So,
Okay.
Go up farther, 4121. That was Barbara's number, and so that won't go anywhere right now. So go to the 4125 number. And I check that every day, almost I'm incessant. I check it all the time.
And there are some other resources on here that students can click also to get more information. There's a counseling services handout and some other things for you to be able to get more information, and some other resources in terms of COVID-19 information. And I think the big thing, I'm going to give each of the panelists one more last kind of parting commentary. But I want to thank everybody for being here today. And I think the big thing is to reach out for help. And there's lots of help available, and reach out. So Terri, we'll start with you for your last parting thought.
Sure. I think it's just really important for everyone to take care of themselves, take care of one another. You know, we're all in this together, and, you know, for students, for staff, for faculty, you know, any of us could have a bad day during this time. I mean, it's pretty much impossible to feel normal right now. And so, you know, just remembering that no one is alone in this, and, you know, just never be afraid to ask for help, to ask questions, because we're all going through it. And so, you know, we understand and want to give all the support we can.
Okay, great. Angie, what about you?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. And I just want to give a shout out to all you students. I have never been more proud of students in my life in terms of your adaptability and resilience and persistence and hanging in there. So I just want to give you huge kudos and tell you to keep going, because psychologists have studied hope. There's a whole body of research on keeping hope alive. And it turns out we can boil hope down to some pretty simple things. And it includes setting goals. So hopeful people set goals for the future. So keep doing that even during the pandemic. The second part of hope is that hopeful people know that, sorry, my computer is telling me my battery is low. It's plugged in and it's not. So it's going to die. Oh no. Hold on 1 second.
Sometimes you have to recharge.
So funny. I thought it was plugged in, but no, it was like got all these scary things. So what we know about hopeful people is that when hopeful people set goals, they know it's not going to be easy. Everything that matters in life is going to bring difficulty and challenge. So the things that matter can bring great joy and meaning, but also challenge and difficulty. And so we create pathways. Hopeful people create pathways. So if path A doesn't work, go to path B. If path B doesn't work, go to path C. So it's called using pathways. And I think this is where connecting into your college resources, if you get stuck, if you can't find that pathway, reach out as a college student to those resources that you have to help figure out that next pathway. Tapping in. And so the third part is agency and motivation. So feeling, and I think this is, Chad mentioned, kind of working on our not being self-critical, like working on our empowerment to take even small steps towards our goals can help you keep hope alive, even during these uncertain, changing times. We don't know what's going to come in the future, right? There's going to be some long-term changes with this. And so one way we can deal with that uncertainty is by focusing in our sphere of influence and think about our goals, our pathways, and our motivation to keep moving forward, even if it's a smaller, more flexible plan than it might have been otherwise. So just hang in there, students. Keep making. I know people are pulling for you and you're not alone going through this.
Great.
I'll jump in and use your word pathways. I tell students it's not how straight the path is that we take, because we all get off the path. And I'll use myself for an example. I'll say, look at me here. I'm in this job. I must look like I know what I'm doing. I've been off the path before. And so the happiest people are the people who knew how to get back on the path rather than stay off the path. And if you don't know how to get back on the path, ask someone. Healthy people ask other people for help, and you'll amazingly find that other people are very willing to help you.
Yeah, and I just got to say, like, this has been wonderful in terms of even, kind of nourishing my own juju and kind of feeling affirmed. And of course, wonderful hearing from other kind of mental health folks, whether it's the pathway. I use the analogy because I always wanted to be a gymnast of falling off the balance beam and you pop your head. But yeah, I always think of like the two, nuggets that I remember in high school, after I graduated from high school, and I got together with my psych teacher who kind of took me under her wing, and I was kind of like, well, I know I'm like 18 or 19 and I'm supposed to have all my like stuff together. And she's like, no, the trick to life is you will get more responsibility, but you'll never quite feel like you have it all together. And that's okay. And that's why, I love what kind of Renee was talking about, the pathway, falling off the path. And then I always think of kind of a second mentor, and Angie will know because Angie and I went to grad school together. But one of the things that was so relieving from our faculty advisor who oversaw us while we were teaching undergrads was Dr. Garavalia had said when we were talking about the end of semester, and she's like, it's not going to be graceful, but it just has to get done. And I'm like, yes, it doesn't have, and I have to that's been probably 15, 16, 17 years. And I still remind myself that every semester doesn't have to be graceful. It just has to get done. And so,
Well said.
Okay.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for those students and faculty and staff who participated. And thank you to our experts for being here. We really appreciate this. Hopefully this was helpful, and good luck with the next 2 weeks. You can do this. You got this. So
You can do it,
again.
people.
All right.